She looked at me with that practiced smile and said the words that would change everything between us forever. Gloria, we've decided to keep Christmas small this year. Just immediate family. I stood there holding the wrapped presents I'd spent weeks choosing, watching my own son nod in agreement behind her. And that's when I realized they'd forgotten who paid for the roof over their heads. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother-in-law who had to fight for her place in her own family. My name is Gloria Allen, and for 63 years I've prided myself on being reasonable, generous, and understanding. I worked double shifts as a pediatric nurse to put my son Michael through college, and when he married Rebecca 5 years ago, I opened my heart and my wallet to welcome her as the daughter I never had. That Tuesday morning in early December started like any other. I was arranging the Christmas decorations in my living room, the same ceramic angels and hand-painted ornaments I'd collected over decades of holidays, when my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Can you come over? We need to talk about Christmas plans." The message seemed innocent enough, but something in the formal tone made my stomach tighten. Rebecca usually called or stopped by without ceremony. A scheduled conversation felt ominous. I drove the familiar route to their house, the beautiful colonial with the wraparound porch that I'd helped them purchase. The down payment had come from my retirement savings, $35,000 that I'd given freely because I wanted to see them settled and happy. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the new landscaping, the freshly painted shutters, and the expensive holiday wreaths hanging on every window. Everything looked perfect, prosperous, and completely funded by their combined income and my ongoing support. Rebecca answered the door wearing a cashmere sweater I'd bought her for her birthday, her blonde hair perfectly styled even though it was barely 10 in the morning. She hugged me with the same careful embrace she'd given me since the day we met, polite but distant, and led me into the living room where Michael was waiting. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair like a teenager about to confess to breaking something valuable. "Mom, sit down," he said, gesturing to the couch across from them. I noticed they'd positioned themselves together on one side of the coffee table while I sat alone on the other, an arrangement that felt more like a business meeting than a family conversation. Rebecca folded her hands in her lap and launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about wanting to create new traditions, about how important it was for her and Michael to establish their own family custom. I nodded along, thinking she was leading up to asking me to adjust my usual Christmas Eve dinner or perhaps suggesting we alternate years hosting. But then she said, the words that would replay in my mind for weeks to come. "So we've decided to keep Christmas small this year, just immediate family." The phrase hung in the air between us like smoke, and I felt my chest tighten as I processed what she wasn't saying directly. "I'm sorry. What exactly does that mean?" I asked, my voice still calm even though my heart was starting to race. Rebecca glanced at Michael, who was studying his hands like they held the answer to a complicated equation. "Well, it means Christmas morning will be just Michael, me, and the kids. We think it's important for them to experience the magic without too many distractions." The word distractions hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died when he was 12, the young man I'd supported through college and graduate school, the person I'd sacrifice anything for without hesitation. "Michael, do you feel the same way?" I asked, giving him the chance to speak for himself. He finally looked up and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not guilt, exactly, but a kind of resigned acceptance, as if he'd already decided that keeping peace with his wife was more important than including his mother. "Mom, it's not that we don't want you there, it's just that Rebecca's parents are coming, and her sister's family, and we thought it might be too crowded." I felt my face flush as the pieces fell into place. Rebecca's family was welcome for Christmas, but I wasn't. Her parents, who lived in Florida and saw the grandchildren twice a year, were part of the immediate family, but the woman who babysat every week and attended every soccer game was somehow an outsider. "I see," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And when exactly did you decide this?" Rebecca's smile never wavered, but I caught a flicker of something triumphant in her eyes. "We've been talking about it for weeks. We really think it's for the best." I sat there for a moment, letting the full weight of their decisions settle over me. This wasn't about space or tradition or creating magic for the children. This was about erasing me from the picture, about Rebecca finally getting what she'd wanted since the day she married my son. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady, and walked to the mantel where they'd displayed the family photos. There were pictures of Rebecca's parents holding the children, her sister's family at the beach, Michael and Rebecca at various celebrations, but there were no photos of me with the grandchildren, no images of the 3 generations of our family together. It was as if I'd been systematically edited out of their lives one frame at a time. "I brought Christmas presents," I said, turning back to face them. "I've been shopping for weeks." Rebecca's expression softened slightly, probably calculating whether she could afford to appear completely heartless. "Of course you can still give them their presents. Maybe we could do something the week before Christmas. Just a little celebration with you, a consolation prize, a secondary event to make me feel included while keeping me away from the real holiday." I walked back to the couch and picked up my purse, moving with the careful dignity I'd learned from 40 years of nursing, of maintaining composure in crisis situations. "I need to think about this," I said. Which was true, I needed to think about a lot of things. Michael stood up as I headed for the door, his face creased with what might have been concern or might have been relief that the conversation was over. "Mom, you understand, right? We're not trying to hurt you." I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd raised to be kind and loyal and grateful, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd failed to teach him the most important lesson of all. Family isn't disposable. "I understand perfectly," I said, and walked out of their house without looking back. The drive home passed in a blur of familiar streets and unfamiliar emotions. I'd been excluded from things before. There had been couples' dinners where I wasn't invited, weekend trips that didn't include me, moments when I'd felt like the third wheel in my son's new life. But Christmas was different. Christmas was sacred, the one day of the year when family came together no matter what other tensions existed. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for several minutes, staring at my own house with its modest holiday decorations, and the stack of wrapped presents visible through the front window. All those gifts I'd bought with such care, imagining the children's faces when they opened them, planning the perfect Christmas morning that would apparently happen without me. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless meals alone since Michael moved out. The silence felt different now, heavier somehow, as if the house itself was mourning the loss of the family gatherings it used to host. I thought about all the Christmases I'd given my son, all the magic I'd created as a single mother working night shifts and double overtime to make sure he never felt deprived. There was the year I'd worked extra shifts for 2 months to buy him the expensive mountain bike he'd wanted, assembling it on Christmas Eve after he'd gone to bed, my fingers numb from the cold garage. The year I'd sewn his Halloween costume into a Christmas pageant outfit, because he'd been chosen to play Joseph in the school play. The Christmas morning when he was 16 and had surprised me with a homemade breakfast and a promise to do better in school. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet where I kept important documents in a fireproof box. Among the insurance papers and old tax returns, I found the folder containing the mortgage paperwork for Michael and Rebecca's house. I'd been making their monthly payments for 3 years, ever since Rebecca quit her job to stay home with the children, and they'd claimed they couldn't afford the mortgage on Michael's salary alone. $1,800 a month, every month, automatically transferred from my checking account to their mortgage company. I'd never missed a payment, never complained about the strain on my own budget, never made them feel guilty for needing help. I'd considered it an investment in their future, a way to make sure my grandchildren had a stable home, and my son didn't have to worry about foreclosure. The paperwork was extensive, multiple documents outlining the terms of my financial support. There was the original agreement we'd signed when they first asked for help, specifying that I would assist with payments until they were financially stable. There was the modification we'd made a year later when Rebecca decided to have another baby and extend her time away from work. And there was the most recent document, signed just 6 months ago, extending the arrangement indefinitely. I studied the cancellation clause, the section that outlined the conditions under which I could withdraw my support. The language was straightforward. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Requiring only 30 days written notice to terminate the agreement, I'd insisted on including that provision, not because I'd ever planned to use it, but because I'd learned from my nursing career that you always needed an exit strategy. As I read through the documents, I remembered the conversation we'd had when they first asked for help. Michael had come to me alone, looking embarrassed and desperate, explaining that Rebecca's spending habits and their combined student loans were making it impossible to keep up with the mortgage. He'd promised it would be temporary, just until he got the promotion he was hoping for, just until Rebecca went back to work. But temporary had stretched into 3 years, and the promotion had come and gone without any discussion of ending the arrangement. Rebecca had mentioned once or twice that she was thinking about returning to work, but those conversations always ended with her deciding that the children needed her at home. Meanwhile, I'd been subsidizing their lifestyle, enabling them to live in a house they couldn't afford while she played the role of the perfect stay-at-home mother. I thought about the new furniture I'd seen in their living room, the expensive family vacation photos on social media, the designer clothes Rebecca wore to school events, all of it funded, at least partially, by my monthly mortgage payment. I'd been proud to help them, proud to be the kind of mother who could provide for her family, even in my retirement years. But sitting in my kitchen that evening, holding the mortgage documents and replaying Rebecca's words about immediate family, I began to see the situation differently. I wasn't helping them build a future, I was enabling them to exclude me from it. I was paying for the privilege of being treated like an outsider, funding the very house from which I was now being banned. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who'd been managing my investments for over a decade. She listened quietly as I explained the situation, asking pointed questions about the mortgage arrangement and the impact of ending it on my own finance. Her advice was pragmatic and clear. I had every right to discontinue the payments, and given the circumstances, she recommended I do so immediately. Gloria, you're not their bank. You're their family member, and if they're not treating you like family, you have no obligation to continue subsidizing their lifestyle. Her words gave me permission to consider something I'd never thought possible. I could stop being the family ATM. I could withdraw my financial support and let them face the consequences of their choices. I spent the rest of the day researching the legal implications of ending the mortgage assistance. The agreement we'd signed was clear and straightforward. I could terminate my support with 30 days' notice, and they would be responsible for making their own payments from that point forward. There were no penalties for me, no legal repercussions, just the end of a financial arrangement that had outlived its purpose. That afternoon I drove to the bank where I'd set up the automatic transfers. The customer service representative, a young man named David, pulled up my account and showed me the payment history. $64,800. That's how much I'd paid toward their mortgage over the past 3 years, not including the original down payment. Nearly $70,000 of my retirement savings, given freely to support a family that had just told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. I'd like to cancel the automatic transfer, I told David, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was doing. He asked if I was sure, if I understood that the cancellation would be permanent, and I assured him that I did. Within minutes, the arrangement that had defined my relationship with my son's family for years was over. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't realized was there. For the first time in years, I wouldn't have to budget around their mortgage payment. I wouldn't have to check my account balance before making my own purchases. I wouldn't have to worry about whether I could afford my own retirement, because I was funding theirs. That evening, I sat down at my computer and drafted a formal letter explaining my decision. I kept it professional and factual, avoiding emotional language or accusation. I simply stated that I was exercising my right to terminate the mortgage assistance agreement, effective in 30 days, and that they would need to make arrangements to handle the payments independently. I printed the letter on my good stationery and signed it with the same careful signature I'd used on countless nursing charts and medical documents. Then I made copies for my own records and sealed the original in an envelope addressed to both Michael and Rebecca. I would deliver it personally, I decided. This wasn't the kind of news that should arrive in the mailbox. The next morning I called Michael at work. His voice was cheerful when he answered, probably assuming I was calling to accept their Christmas arrangement, or to apologize for my reaction. "Hi, Mom. I'm glad you called. Rebecca and I were talking, and we thought maybe we could do Christmas Eve with you this year. Just dinner, nothing too elaborate. Another consolation prize, another way to make me feel included while keeping me on the periphery." "That's thoughtful of you," I said, "but I need to come by the house this evening. There's something I need to discuss with both of you." The change in his tone was immediate. "Is everything okay? You sound serious." "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I just have some paperwork to give you." "Can you be home around 6? He agreed, probably curious about what kind of paperwork would require an in-person meeting. I didn't elaborate. Some conversations were better had face-to-face. I spent the day organizing my finances, calculating how much extra money I'd have each month once the mortgage payments stopped. The amount was substantial, enough to take the vacation to Ireland I'd been postponing for years, enough to renovate my kitchen or contribute more to my favorite charities. For the first time in years I could make financial decisions based on my own needs and wants rather than my son's obligations. At 6 o'clock exactly I pulled into their driveway. The house looked as beautiful as ever, every window glowing with warm light, the holiday decorations creating a picture-perfect scene. I wondered if they realized how much of that perfection had been purchased with my money, how much of their comfortable lifestyle depended on my ongoing support. Michael answered the door with a smile that faded when he saw the envelope in my hand. "Mom, you look like you're delivering official business." Rebecca appeared behind him, her expression already guarded, as if she sensed that whatever I was bringing wasn't going to be good news. "May I come in?" I asked, though I was already stepping into the foyer. They led me to the living room, the same space where we'd had our conversation about Christmas just 2 days earlier. This time, however, I remained standing while they sat down, a reversal of power that felt significant. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I began, pulling the letter from the envelope, "about immediate family and Christmas traditions and what's best for everyone involved." I could see Michael's shoulders relax slightly, probably thinking I was about to give them my blessing for their holiday plans. "I've decided you're absolutely right," I continued. "It's important for families to establish their own traditions, to be independent, to make their own decisions about what's best for their household." Rebecca nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased that I was being so reasonable about their Christmas exclusion. "Which is why I'm terminating our mortgage assistance agreement," I said, placing the letter on the coffee table between us. "Effective in 30 days, you'll be responsible for making your own mortgage payment." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Michael stared at the letter as if it were written in a foreign language, while Rebecca's face went through a series of expressions that would have been amusing if the situation weren't so serious. "I'm sorry, what?" Michael finally managed to say. I sat down across from them, folding my hands in my lap the same way Rebecca had done when she'd delivered her Christmas announcement. "You heard me correctly. I'm ending the financial arrangement we've had for the past 3 years. You'll need to budget for the full mortgage payment, starting next month." Rebecca found her voice first, her tone sharp with disbelief. "Gloria, you can't be serious. We have a contract. We've been counting on your help." I nodded calmly. "We do have a contract, and it includes a cancellation clause that I'm now exercising. You'll find all the details in the letter." Michael picked up the document with shaking hands and began to read. I watched his face change as he processed the formal language, the 30-day notice, the finality of my decision. "Mom, this is crazy. You can't just stop helping us because of one conversation about Christmas." "I'm not stopping because of one conversation," I said. "I'm stopping because I finally understand my place in this family. You've made it clear that I'm not immediate family, that I'm a distraction, that my presence isn't wanted at the most important celebration of the year, so I'm simply adjusting my financial obligations to match my family status." Rebecca's carefully controlled composure cracked. You're being ridiculous. Christmas is just one day. We never said we didn't want you in our lives. I looked at her steadily, this woman who had systematically worked to minimize my role in my son's life, while maximizing my financial contributions to it. Actually, you did say that, I replied. You said I wasn't immediate family. You said my presence would be a distraction. You said it was important for you to establish your own traditions. I'm simply helping you do exactly that, by removing myself from your financial obligations as well. Michael was reading through the letter again, his face growing paler with each paragraph. Mom, we can't afford the mortgage without your help. You know that. Rebecca doesn't work, and my salary alone isn't enough to cover all our expenses. Then perhaps it's time for Rebecca to return to work, I said. Or perhaps you need to consider downsizing to a home you can afford on your own income. These are exactly the kinds of decisions that immediate families make together. The room fell silent again as the implications of my decision settled over them. I could see Rebecca calculating numbers in her head, trying to figure out how they would manage without my monthly contribution. I could see Michael wrestling with the reality that his comfortable lifestyle was about to become much more complicated. You're punishing us, Rebecca said finally, her voice tight with anger. You're using money to manipulate us into including you in Christmas. I shook my head. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply aligning my financial support with my family status. You've told me I'm not immediate family, so I'm no longer providing the kind of support that immediate family members typically give to each other. Michael looked up from the letter, his eyes pleading. Mom, please, can't we work this out? Maybe we made a mistake about Chris. Maybe we can find a way to include everyone. I felt a flicker of sadness for the desperation in his voice, but I also recognized it for what it was. He wasn't reconsidering Christmas because he'd realized how much my presence mattered to him. He was reconsidering it because he'd realized how much my money mattered to his lifestyle. Michael, I've been making your mortgage payments for 3 years, I said. I've given you nearly $70,000 to help you maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford on your own. I've done this gladly, without complaint, because I thought I was helping my family, but apparently, I was wrong about what family means to you. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn and the expensive landscaping I'd helped fund. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life putting other people's needs before my own. I worked extra shifts to pay for your college education. I gave you my life savings for your down payment. I've been subsidizing your mortgage for years while living on a fixed income myself. I turned back to face them, these two people who had taken my generosity for granted, while systematically excluding me from their lives. I thought I was investing in family relationships, in being part of something bigger than myself. But what I was actually doing was paying for the privilege of being treated like an outsider. Rebecca's face was flushed with anger, but I could see the fear beneath it. This is financial abuse, she said. You're using money to control us. I almost laughed at the irony. No, Rebecca, financial abuse is what you've been doing to me, taking my money while treating me like I don't matter, using my generosity to fund a lifestyle that excludes me from the very family I'm supporting. Michael was still staring at the letter, probably trying to figure out how they were going to come up with $1,800 a month on top of their existing expenses. Mom, even if we made a mistake about Christmas, this seems like an extreme reaction. Can't we just talk about it? We are talking about it, I said. And what I'm telling you is that I'm done being your financial safety net, while being treated as a social inconvenience. If you want to be independent, if you want to make your own family decisions without my input, then you can do it without my money as well. I walked back to the coffee table and picked up my purse. The letter explains everything. You have 30 days to make other arrangements. I suggest you start by creating a realistic budget that accounts for your actual income rather than your actual income plus my contribution. As I headed for the door, Rebecca called after me. What about the children? What about your grandchildren? You're willing to let them lose their home over one conversation. I stopped and turned back, feeling the weight of that emotional manipulation. My grandchildren's housing security shouldn't depend on their grandmother's willingness to accept being excluded from family celebrations. That's not healthy for anyone involved. Besides, I added,
you're not going to lose your home. You're going to have to make some difficult financial decisions, just like every other family does. You'll have to prioritize your spending, maybe give up some luxuries, possibly consider Rebecca returning to work. These are normal challenges that families face when they're living independent. I walked out of their house for the second time in 3 days, but this time I felt a sense of resolution rather than heartbreak. I'd spent 2 days processing the pain of their rejection, and now I was taking concrete action to protect my own dignity and financial security. I was no longer going to fund my own exclusion from family life. The drive home was peaceful, the December evening crisp and clear. I thought about the conversations that would follow, the phone calls from Michael trying to negotiate, the potential involvement of other family members who might try to mediate. But I also thought about the freedom I'd just given myself, the ability to make my own choices about how to spend my money and my time. That night I called my sister Margaret, who lived in Arizona and had been watching my relationship with Michael and Rebecca with growing concern. She listened to the whole story without interruption, then let out a long sigh. "Gloria, I've been waiting for you to stand up for yourself for years. That girl has been working to push you out of their lives since the day she married Michael, and he's been too blind or too weak to stop her." We talked for over an hour, about family dynamics and financial boundaries, and the difference between helping and enabling. Margaret reminded me of all the times I'd complained about feeling excluded, all the occasions when I'd been relegated to the background while Rebecca's family took center stage. "You're not being cruel," she said, "you're being smart, and it's about time." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and thought about the Christmas I'd been planning. I'd imagined cooking breakfast for everyone, watching the children open their presents, creating the warm family memories that had always been so important to me. Instead, I would be spending the holiday alone, probably working as a volunteer at the local hospital the way I had during my nursing career. But for the first time in years, I wouldn't be spending Christmas feeling like an outsider in my own family. I wouldn't be watching Rebecca orchestrate the perfect family celebration while making sure I knew I was only tolerated, not treasured. I wouldn't be pretending to be grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion they decided to offer me. I was taking back control of my own life, and it felt liberating in a way I hadn't expected. The sadness was still there, the grief for the family relationships I'd thought I had, but apparently didn't. But underneath the sadness was something stronger, self-respect. I was finally treating myself with the same dignity I'd always tried to show others. The next few days passed quietly. I organized my finances, confirmed the cancellation of the mortgage assistance, and began planning how to use the extra money in my budget. I researched volunteer opportunities for the holidays, looked into travel destinations for the spring, and even considered adopting a pet for companionship. Michael called twice, but I let the calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to negotiate or explain myself further. I'd said everything I needed to say, and now it was time for them to process the consequences of their choices. The voicemails he left were carefully worded, asking if we could talk, saying he was concerned about me, hoping we could work things out. But there was no acknowledgement of how their Christmas decision had affected me, no recognition of the years of financial support I'd provided, no understanding of why their exclusion had hurt so deep.
He was focused on solving the immediate problem of the mortgage payments, not on addressing the underlying issues that had created the problem in the first place. On Friday evening, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Michael standing on my porch, alone, holding what appeared to be a small wrapped gift. I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. When I opened the door, he looked younger than his 31 years, uncertain and almost vulnerable. "Mom, can I come in? I brought you something." I stepped aside and let him enter, noting that he looked tired and stressed. He followed me into the living room and sat heavily on the couch, the same spot where he used to curl up as a child when he was upset about something. "I brought you an early Christmas present," he said, holding out the wrapped box. "I thought maybe we could talk." I accepted the gift but didn't open it immediately. "What did you want to talk about, Mike?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years, when he was struggling with difficult decisions. "I think I understand why you're upset about Christmas. And I think I understand why you're ending the mortgage help. But I'm not sure I know how to fix it. I set the unwrapped gift on the coffee table and looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be better than he was showing himself to be. The question isn't how to fix it, Michael. The question is whether you think it needs fixing. Do you think there's anything wrong with excluding me from Christmas while continuing to accept my financial support? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When you put it that way, it sounds really bad. I nodded. It is really bad. And the fact that you needed me to put it that way suggests that you haven't been thinking about how your decisions affect me. Rebecca says you're being manipulative, he said, then immediately looked like he regretted sharing that. She says, using money to force us to include you isn't fair. I felt my jaw tighten. I'm not forcing you to include me anywhere. I'm simply choosing not to financially support people who don't consider me part of their immediate family. That's different, I continued. If you want to exclude me from Christmas, that's your right. But it's also my right to exclude you from my financial support. You can't have it both ways, Michael. You can't treat me like an outsider while expecting me to fund your lifestyle like a family member. He looked up at me with the same expression he'd worn as a child when he'd been caught in a lie. I never thought about it that way. I guess I just assumed you'd always help us, no matter what. That assumption was exactly the problem. Michael, I've been helping you for 3 years. I've given you nearly $70,000. I've done this gladly because I thought I was supporting my family. But somewhere along the way you stopped thinking of me as family, and started thinking of me as an ATM. That's not true, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Of course I think of you as family. You're my mother. I shook my head. Family doesn't exclude family from Christmas. Family doesn't make their own mother feel like a burden or a distraction. Family doesn't take someone's financial support for granted while treating them like they don't matter. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of my words settling between us. Finally, he picked up the gift he'd brought and held it out to me again. Will you open this? Please? I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a framed photo of the two of us from his college graduation. We were both smiling, his arm around my shoulders, both of us looking proud and happy. I found this in my office, he said. I was looking at it and thinking about everything you've done for me, everything you've sacrificed, and I realized that Rebecca and I have been taking you for granted. We've been treating your support like it's something we're entitled to instead of something we're grateful for. I studied the photo, remembering that day, the pride I'd felt watching him walk across the stage, the sense of accomplishment that came from seeing him succeed. This is a lovely picture, I said, but it doesn't change the fact that you've chosen to exclude me from Christmas while continuing to accept my money. What if we changed our minds about Christmas? He asked. What if we invited everyone, including you? Would you consider continuing to help with the mortgage? I looked at him for a long moment. This son I'd raised to be better than he was showing himself to be. Michael, do you hear yourself? You're offering to include me in Christmas as payment for continued financial support. That's not love. That's a transaction. His face reddened as he realized what he'd said. I didn't mean it that way. I meant, what if we realized we were wrong about Christmas and wanted to do things differently? I set the photo on the coffee table next to the unopened letter. If you realized you were wrong about Christmas, you'd apologize and change your plans because you love me and want me to be part of your family. You wouldn't negotiate my inclusion in exchange for mortgage payment. The fact that you're even suggesting that trade shows that you still don't understand what you did wrong. I continued. You think this is about Christmas, specifically, but it's not. It's about respect and appreciation and treating me like I matter. It's about recognizing that your financial security shouldn't come at the expense of my emotional well-being. Michael stood up and began pacing, another gesture from his childhood that appeared when he was frustrated. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know what you want me to do. I watched him pace, remembering all the times I'd watched him struggle with problems as a boy, all the times I'd helped him find solutions and offered guidance. I want you to stop thinking about how to fix this and start thinking about how to be better, I said. I want you to have a real conversation with Rebecca about how you treat me. I want you to make family decisions based on love and inclusion, not on convenience and conflict avoidance. I want you to create a budget that you can afford on your own income, with your own choices about priorities and spending. I continued, I want you to stop assuming that I'll always be there to bail you out financially while you exclude me emotionally. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. And if we do all of that, if we make changes and do better, would you consider helping us again? I sighed, feeling the weight of his continued focus on the money rather than the relationship. Michael, the mortgage assistance is over, permanent. Not because I want to punish you, but because you need to learn to be independent. You need to make your own financial decisions and live with the consequences. But that doesn't mean our relationship has to be over. I asked, if you and Rebecca want to rebuild our family dynamic, if you want to include me in your lives in a meaningful way, I'm open to that, but it has to be because you value me as a person, not because you need my money. Michael sat back down, looking defeated. Rebecca is going to be furious. She's already talking about how we're going to have to sell the house or declare bankruptcy. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I also recognized the emotional manipulation in his statement. Michael, you're not going to lose your house. You're going to have to make some difficult choices about your lifestyle. That's what adults do when they're living independently. Rebecca can return to work, I said. You can cut back on unnecessary expenses. You can create a realistic budget instead of living beyond your means. These are all normal challenges that families face, and you're capable of handling them. He looked at me with something that might have been admiration mixed with frustration. You're really not going to change your mind, are you? I shook my head. I'm really. This decision is final, and it's what's best for all of us. You need to learn to stand on your own feet, and I need to learn to protect my own well-being. After he left, I sat in my living room holding the graduation photo and thinking about the man my son had become, versus the man I'd hoped he would be. The sadness was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Hope. The phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. 3 days after my conversation with Michael, I recognized Rebecca's number and let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message while I made my coffee. Her voice was strained, artificially sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something but was trying to maintain her composure. Gloria, I think we need to clear the air about this whole situation. There's obviously been a misunderstanding, and I'd love to sit down and work things out like adults. Maybe we could meet for lunch this week. My treat, of course. I deleted the message without calling her back. There had been no misunderstanding. Rebecca understood perfectly well what she'd done, and what I'd done in response. This lunch invitation was damage control, an attempt to negotiate her way back to the financial arrangement that had been funding her comfortable lifestyle. By noon, she'd called 3 more times, each message more urgent than the last. In the final voicemail, her careful composure had cracked slightly. Gloria, we really need to talk. This mortgage situation is affecting the children, and I don't think that's what you intended. Please call me back. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Rebecca had spent 5 years systematically excluding me from family decisions, treating me like an inconvenience, and working to minimize my role in my grandchildren's lives. Now suddenly she was concerned about how my choices might affect those same children. I spent the morning reorganizing my financial documents, creating new folders for my revised budget and investment plans. Without the monthly mortgage payment, I had options I hadn't considered in years. I could increase my charitable giving, take the European vacation I'd been postponing, or simply build up my savings for future emergencies. The freedom felt intoxicating. For 3 years, I'd been budgeting around their mortgage payment, carefully calculating whether I could afford new clothes or home repairs or gifts for friends. I'd been living like someone on a tight fixed income while subsidizing their middle-class lifestyle. Now I could make financial decisions based on my own needs and desires, rather than their obligations. Around 2 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole I could see Rebecca standing on my porch, dressed in her most conservative outfit, holding what appeared to be a homemade casserole. She'd brought props for this performance, visual aids, to remind me of the domestic harmony I was supposedly destroying. I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. When I opened the door, Rebecca's smile was so bright, it was almost blinding. Gloria, I was in the neighborhood, and thought I'd drop off some of that chicken casserole you liked so much, and I was hoping we could chat for a few minutes. She'd never made me chicken casserole. In 5 years of marriage to my son, Rebecca had cooked for me exactly twice, both times when she'd needed a favor. This casserole was probably something she'd picked up from the grocery store and transferred to her own dish. "That's thoughtful," I said, accepting the dish but not inviting her inside. We stood in the doorway, Rebecca shifting her weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with my lack of invitation. "How are the children handling everything?" I asked, genuinely curious about my grandchildren's welfare. "Well, that's actually what I wanted to talk about," Rebecca said, seizing the opening. "Sophie asked why Grandma Gloria isn't coming for Christmas, and I didn't know what to tell her. She's only 7, you know. She doesn't understand adult complications." I felt the familiar tug of guilt that Rebecca wielded like a weapon whenever she needed to manipulate a situation. "What did you tell her?" Rebecca's eyes filled with practiced tears. "I told her that sometimes adults have disagreements, but that families always work things out. She's been asking every day if you're coming to see her open presents." The emotional manipulation was so calculated it made my stomach turn. Rebecca had excluded me from Christmas, but now she was using my absence to make me feel guilty about disappointing the children. She was weaponizing my love for my grandchildren to get what she wanted. "Rebecca, Sophie is asking about Christmas because you told me I wasn't welcome," I said calmly. "If you want her to see me open presents with her, you know exactly how to make that happen." Rebecca's tears disappeared as quickly as they'd appeared. "Gloria, surely you understand that the Christmas situation and the mortgage situation are completely separate issues." I almost laughed at her audacity. "Are they? Because from where I'm standing they seem very connected. You decided I wasn't immediate family for the purposes of Christmas celebrations, so I decided I wasn't immediate family for the purposes of financial support." "But that's completely different," Rebecca protested. "Christmas is just one day, the mortgage affects our entire lives, our children's security, our future." I nodded. "You're absolutely right, the mortgage does affect your entire life. Which is why it's so interesting that you never considered how excluding me from Christmas might affect our entire relationship." Rebecca's carefully constructed facade began to crack. "Look, maybe we made a mistake about Christmas. Maybe we can figure out a way to include everyone. But ending the mortgage help seems like such an extreme reaction." I set the casserole down on the hall table and looked at her directly. "Rebecca, you've been working to push me out of this family since the day you married Michael. You've made it clear at every opportunity that I'm not really welcome, that my presence is tolerated rather than treasured. The only thing extreme here is that it took me 3 years and $70,000 to finally stand up for myself." Her composure shattered completely. "That's not fair. I've always been respectful to you. I've included you in family events. I've been a good daughter-in-law." I studied her face, this woman, who had perfected the art of polite exclusion, who had mastered the skill of making me feel unwelcome, while maintaining plausible deniability. "Respectful isn't the same as welcoming," I said. "Including me isn't the same as wanting me there. Being a good daughter-in-law isn't the same as treating me like family." Rebecca's face flushed with anger. "What exactly do you want from me?" "I can't control how you interpret every interaction we have. I want you to stop pretending that this is about my interpretation," I replied. "You excluded me from Christmas. You made that decision deliberately, knowing it would hurt me, knowing it would send a clear message about my place in this family, and now you're upset about the consequences of that decision." "Fine," Rebecca snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. "You want the truth. Christmas is stressful enough, without having to manage your feelings and your expectations. My parents are elderly, my sister has special needs children, and I'm trying to create a peaceful holiday for everyone. Sometimes that means making difficult choices about who to include." There it was, the honesty I'd been waiting for. I wasn't excluded because of space or tradition or family dynamics. I was excluded because including me was inconvenient, because managing my feelings required effort Rebecca wasn't willing to expend. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "That's exactly what I thought was happening. You find my presence burdensome, so you excluded me, and now you find the loss of my financial support burdensome,
So you're trying to negotiate my inclusion. Rebecca's eyes widened as she realized what she'd admitted. That's not what I meant, she backtracked frantically. I meant that holidays are complicated for everyone. I didn't mean that you're burdensome, but the damage was done. She'd confirmed what I'd suspected all along. I wasn't family to Rebecca. I was an obligation, a complication, someone to be managed rather than cherished. Rebecca, I appreciate your honesty more than you know, I said, because now I can stop wondering if I misunderstood the situation. You've made it clear that including me in your life requires effort you're not willing to make. So I'm making it easier for you by removing myself from situations where I'm not wanted. But the mortgage, she started to say, then stopped herself. The sentence hung in the air between us, incomplete, but revealing. She couldn't bring herself to say what we both knew she meant, but the mortgage payments were different, those she wanted to keep. The mortgage assistance was a gift, I said. It was my way of supporting my family, of helping my son and his wife build a stable life together. But gifts are given freely, and they can be withdrawn just as freely when the relationship changes. Rebecca's desperation was becoming more apparent by the minute. Gloria, please, we can work this out. We can find a solution that makes everyone happy. I shook my head. Rebecca, I am happy. For the first time in years, I'm making decisions based on my own well-being, rather than your convenience. I'm protecting my own interests instead of subsidizing my own exclusion. But what about Michael? What about the children? You're punishing them for my mistakes. The victim playing was predictable but no less infuriating. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply aligning my financial support with my family stat. You've told me I'm not immediate family, so I'm no longer providing immediate family-level support. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, probably calculating whether there was any argument left that might work. What would it take? She finally asked. What would you need from us to reconsider? I looked at this woman who had spent 5 years treating me like an inconvenience, and was now trying to negotiate her way back to my money. Rebecca, there's nothing you can say or do that will restore the mortgage assistance, I said firmly. That chapter is closed permanently. But if you want to repair our relationship, if you want to include me in family life in a meaningful way, that's a separate conversation. How is that separate? She demanded. If we include you in everything, if we make you feel welcome, why wouldn't you want to help us? The transactional nature of her thinking was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that family relationships were business arrangements, that love and support were commodities to be traded. Because healthy family relationships aren't based on financial transactions, I explained. If you include me in Christmas, because you love me and want me there, that's wonderful. If you include me because you need my money, that's prostitution. Rebecca's face went white at the bluntness of my comparison. That's a horrible thing to say, I shrugged. It's an accurate thing to say. You're offering me inclusion in exchange for continued financial support. What would you call that? I'd call it trying to rebuild our family relationship, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. And I'd call you ending the mortgage assistance financial abuse. The accusation was so ridiculous I almost smiled. Rebecca, financial abuse is using money to control someone. I'm not controlling you. I'm simply choosing not to fund you. You have every right to exclude me from Christmas, I continue, and I have every right to exclude you from my financial support. Neither of us is required to provide what the other person wants. Rebecca was clearly struggling to find another angle of attack. But you're hurting innocent children. Sophie and Tommy don't deserve to lose their home because their grandmother is having hurt feelings. The manipulation was getting more desperate and more insulting. First of all, your children aren't going to lose their home. You're going to have to make some lifestyle adjustments, but that's very different from homelessness. Second, I'm not making this decision because of hurt feelings. I'm making it because of clear thinking. For 3 years I've been enabling you and Michael to live beyond your means. I've been subsidizing a lifestyle that you couldn't afford on your own income. That's not helping you, that's handicapping you. I'm forcing you to become financially independent, which is something you should have done years ago. Rebecca's composure was completely gone now, replaced by raw panic. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Michael's job is demanding. The children have activities and expenses. we have commitments and obligations. We can't just cut back on everything. Why not? I asked. Other families manage to live within their means. Other couples figure out how to balance work and family and financial responsibilities without subsidies from their parents. Why are you and Michael different? Because we've been counting on your help, she said.
We've made decisions based on the assumption that you'd continue to support us. That assumption was exactly the problem. Rebecca, you've been counting on my help while systematically excluding me from your family. You've taken my financial support for granted while treating my emotional needs as inconveniences. You've had 3 years to become financially independent, I continued. 3 years to adjust your lifestyle, to increase your income, to create a sustainable budget. Instead, you've become more dependent on my support while becoming less welcoming of my presence. Rebecca was crying now, real tears this time, born of genuine fear rather than calculated manipulation. What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to manage without your help? I felt a wave of sympathy for her panic, but I also recognized that this crisis was necessary for their growth. You're going to do what every other family does, I said. You're going to create a realistic budget based on your actual income. You're going to prioritize your expenses and cut back on non-essentials. You're going to consider whether Rebecca should return to work to increase the household income. I can't go back to work, Rebecca protested. The children need me at home. I raised an eyebrow. Or is that just more convenient for you than dealing with daycare and career responsibilities? Her face flushed again. You don't understand how hard it is to balance everything. Actually, I understand perfectly, I said. I raised Michael as a single mother while working full-time as a nurse. I balanced everything without financial support from my parents, without a spouse to share the load, without the luxury of staying home. You'll figure it out because you'll have to. Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, probably processing the reality that her comfortable lifestyle was about to become much more complicated. What if Michael loses his job? What if something happens and we really can't make the payments? I considered her question seriously. Then you'll deal with that crisis the same way other families do. You'll look for new employment. You'll consider selling the house. You'll make whatever adjustments are necessary. But we're family, she said weakly, playing her last card. Family helps family. I nodded. Family does help family. But family also includes family. Family treats family with respect and consideration. Family doesn't exclude family from important celebrations while expecting continued financial support. You can't have it both ways, Rebecca. You can't treat me like an outsider while expecting me to fund your lifestyle like a family member. You made a choice about my role in your family, and I'm simply accepting that choice and adjusting my behavior accordingly. Rebecca stood up to leave, her defeat obvious in every line of her body. I hope you're satisfied, she said bitterly. I hope destroying our financial security makes you feel better about missing one Christmas dinner. I looked at her steadily. Rebecca, I didn't destroy your financial security. I withdrew my subsidy of your financial irresponsibility. There's a significant difference. And this isn't about missing one Christmas dinner, I added. This is about 5 years of being treated like I don't matter. 5 years of having my generosity taken for granted. 5 years of being excluded, while being expected to pay for the privilege. After she left, I sat in my living room and thought about the conversation. Rebecca's desperation had been real, her fear genuine, but so had her sense of entitlement, her assumption that my financial support was something she deserved rather than something I chose to give. I thought about my grandchildren, Sophie and Tommy, who would be affected by their parents' financial stress. It pained me to know they might have to give up some activities or luxuries, but I also knew that learning to live within their means would ultimately be better for the whole family. That evening, Michael called. His voice was strained, exhausted. Mom, Rebecca told me about your conversation today. She's really upset. I waited for him to continue, curious about whether he would acknowledge what Rebecca had admitted, or focus solely on the financial implications. She said you're not going to change your mind about the mortgage, he continued. She said it's permanent. I confirmed that this was correct. Michael, I've made my decision based on careful consideration of our family dynamics and my own financial well-being. This isn't a negotiation or a punishment, it's a permanent change. But Mom, What are we supposed to do? We can't afford the house without your help. I heard the same desperation in his voice that I'd heard from Rebecca, the same assumption that their financial problems were somehow my responsibility to solve. You're going to do what you should have been doing all along, I said. You're going to live within your means. You're going to create a budget based on your actual income, rather than your actual income plus my contributions. That's easy for you to say, Michael snapped, his frustration finally breaking through. You're not the one facing foreclosure or bankruptcy. I felt a flare of anger at his tone. Michael, you're not facing foreclosure. You're facing the need to make some difficult financial decisions. That's very different. And yes, it is easy for me to say, because I've been living within my means my entire adult life. I continue. Even while supporting your lifestyle, I've been careful with my own budget, sacrificing my own wants to help you. Now I'm choosing to stop making those sacrifices. You're being selfish, he said, the accusation hanging in the air between us. I felt the words like a physical blow, but I also recognized them for what they were, the last resort of someone who had run out of rational arguments. Michael, I've given you nearly $70,000 over the past 3 years, I said quietly. I've subsidized your mortgage, supported your lifestyle, and enabled you to live in a house you couldn't afford on your own. If that's selfish, then I'm proud to be selfish. That's not what I meant, he backtracked quickly. I meant that you're being selfish now, cutting us off when we need you most. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. I'm being self-preserving. There's a difference. I'm protecting my own financial security and emotional well-being, instead of sacrificing them for people who don't appreciate the sacrifice. Of course we appreciate it, Michael protested. We've always been grateful for your help. I almost laughed at the irony. Michael, if you were grateful, you wouldn't have excluded me from Christmas. If you appreciated my support, you wouldn't have treated me like an inconvenience while taking my money. Gratitude isn't just saying thank you, I continued. Gratitude is treating the person who's helping you with respect and consideration. Gratitude is including them in your life, not just your budget. Michael was quiet for a long moment. What if we fixed the Christmas thing? What if we invited you and made it clear that you're wanted and welcome? I sighed, hearing the same transactional thinking that Rebecca had displayed. Michael, if you invite me to Christmas now, after this conversation, how will I know whether it's because you want me there or because you need my money? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean? I mean that any invitation you extend now will be suspect, I explained. Any inclusion you offer will feel like it's motivated by financial desperation rather than genuine love. You've poisoned the well, Mike. You can't unexclude me from Christmas and expect everything to go back to the way it was. So there's nothing we can do? He asked, his voice small and defeated. There's nothing that would make you reconsider. I felt my heart break a little at the pain in his voice, but I also knew that this conversation was necessary. The mortgage assistance is over permanently, I said firmly, but our relationship doesn't have to. If you want to rebuild our family dynamic, if you want to include me in your lives, because you love me, rather than because you need my money, that's a separate issue. How would we even begin to do that? He asked. I considered the question seriously. You could start by having an honest conversation with Rebecca about how you've been treating me. You could acknowledge that excluding me from Christmas was hurtful and wrong. You could commit to including me in family decisions and celebrations going forward. But mostly, you could stop thinking about me as your financial safety net and start thinking about me as your mother, I continued. You could value my presence in your life rather than just my presence to your life. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, thinking about the family I'd thought I had versus the family I actually had. The sadness was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for their financial problems. I wasn't expected to solve their crises or fund their mistakes. I was free to be just Gloria, not Gloria the benefactor or Gloria the ATM. I could make my own choices about how to spend my time and money, without worrying about their expectations or obligations. I could finally prioritize my own needs and wants, after years of putting theirs first. The next morning brought another phone call, this time from Michael's sister-in-law, Rebecca's sister Janet. I'd met her a few times at family gatherings, a sharp-faced woman who always seemed to be calculating the value of everything around her. Gloria, Rebecca asked me to call, Janet began without preamble. She's very upset about this whole mortgage situation, and frankly, so am I. I can't believe you'd abandon your own family over something as trivial as Christmas seating arrangement. The mischaracterization was so outrageous I almost hung up immediately. Janet, this isn't about seating arrangements. This is about being excluded from Christmas entirely because I'm not considered immediate family. But surely you understand that young families need to establish their own traditions, Janet continued, clearly reciting talking points Rebecca had given her. It's not personal, it's just practical. I marveled at how quickly the narrative had been rewritten to make me the unreasonable one. Actually, it is personal, I said. When you exclude someone from family celebrations while continuing to accept their financial support, that's deeply personal. Janet's tone became more aggressive. Look, I don't know all the details of your financial arrangement, but using money to manipulate family relationships is never acceptable. I felt my patience evaporating. Janet, I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm simply choosing not to fund people who don't want me around. Rebecca has made it clear that my presence is burdensome, so I'm removing that burden by removing myself. You're being dramatic, Janet said, dismissively. Rebecca never said you were burdensome. I thought about Rebecca's admission the day before, her honest explanation about why managing my feelings was too much effort for her to make. Actually, she did say that, I replied. Yesterday when she came to my house, she admitted that including me in Christmas was inconvenient because it required managing my feelings and expectations. She was quite clear that my presence made the holiday more stressful for her. Janet was quiet for a moment, probably realizing that Rebecca had shared more than she'd intended. Well, even if she said something insensitive, that doesn't justify destroying their financial security. I'm not destroying anything. I'm ending a subsidy that was never meant to be permanent. Michael and Rebecca are adults who need to learn to support themselves, instead of depending on their mother's retirement savings. But what about the children? Janet played the same card Rebecca and Michael had used. What about your grandchildren? I took a deep breath, preparing to have the same conversation I'd had multiple times over the past week. My grandchildren will be fine, I said. They'll learn to live within their family's actual means, instead of within their family's subsidized means. That's a valuable lesson about financial responsibility. You're heartless, Janet said, her mask of concern finally slipping to reveal her real opinion. I can't believe Michael's mother would be so cruel to her own family. The accusation stung, but I also recognized it as emotional manipulation. Janet, I've given this family nearly $70,000 over 3 years, I said calmly. I've supported them financially while being excluded emotionally. If that's heartless, then I'm comfortable being heartless. But they're going to lose their house, Janet insisted. Rebecca is talking about having to file for bankruptcy. I doubted the truth of this claim, but even if it were accurate, it wouldn't change my decision. If they lose their house, it will be because they bought a house they couldn't afford and maintained a lifestyle they couldn't sustain, I said. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to fix. You could afford to help them, Janet pointed out. It's not like the money means anything to you. The assumption that my financial sacrifice was meaningless because I could afford it was infuriating. The money means a great deal to me, I said. It represents years of careful saving, decades of working extra shifts, a lifetime of financial responsibility. It's my retirement security, and I'm no longer willing to risk it to subsidize people who treat me badly. Janet's frustration was evident in her voice. So you're just going to let them struggle while you sit on your pile of money? I almost laughed at the characterization. I'm going to let them be adults who are responsible for their own financial decisions. Yeah, and I'm going to use my money for my own needs and wants, instead of funding people who don't want me around, I continued. That seems like a reasonable approach to me. After Janet hung up, clearly frustrated by her inability to guilt me into changing my mind, I realized that this was just the beginning. Rebecca was mobilizing her support network, trying to create pressure from multiple directions, to force me back into the role of family finance. I spent the afternoon researching elder care attorneys, not because I needed legal protection,
but because I wanted to understand my rights and options. The attorney I spoke with confirmed what I already knew. I had every right to end the mortgage assistance, and there was nothing anyone could do to force me to continue it. More importantly, she warned me about family members who might try to claim financial elder abuse or manipulation. Document everything. Keep records of all conversations. Save all text messages and voicemails. If this situation escalates, you'll want proof that you're making these decisions with a clear mind and sound judgment. That evening, I started a journal, writing down everything that had happened over the past week. The Christmas exclusion, the mortgage decision, the various attempts at manipulation and guilt. I wanted a clear record of events in case anyone tried to rewrite history later. As I wrote, I thought about the patterns I'd been enabling for years. Michael's assumption that I would always be there to bail him out financially, Rebecca's confidence that she could exclude me emotionally while including me financially, the family's collective belief that my money was more important than my feelings. I realized that ending the mortgage assistance wasn't just about protecting my dignity or standing up for myself. It was about forcing them to grow up, to take responsibility, to become the independent adults they should have been all along. For the first time in years, I went to bed feeling proud of myself rather than guilty about disappointing someone else. I had finally learned the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of, between helping family and enabling dysfunction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts at manipulation, new pressure to restore the financial arrangement that had been funding my own exclusion. But tonight, I was at peace with my decision and excited about my future. I was finally free to be Gloria Allen, not Gloria the ATM. The harassment started in earnest on Thursday morning. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, friends of Rebecca's who had apparently been recruited to pressure me into changing my mind. The messages followed a predictable pattern: expressions of concern for the children, accusations of selfishness, and thinly veiled threats about family loyalty. One message from someone named Cheryl read, "I don't know you personally, but Rebecca is one of my dearest friends. I can't believe you would put innocent children at risk over a family disagreement. I hope you'll reconsider your decision before it's too late." Another, from a woman called Michelle, was more direct. "What kind of grandmother abandons her family when they need her most? Those poor babies don't deserve to suffer because their grandmother is having a tantrum." I turned my phone off and spent the morning in my garden, pulling weeds and deadheading the last of the season's flowers. The physical work felt therapeutic, grounding me in reality while Rebecca's flying monkeys circled overhead. Each handful of weeds I pulled felt like another piece of toxic family dynamic being removed from my life. When I finally turned my phone back on that afternoon, there were 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were from the same group of Rebecca's friends, but a few were from numbers I didn't recognize at all. Rebecca had clearly expanded her campaign beyond her immediate social circle. One voicemail stood out from the rest. It was from Dr. Sarah Martinez, Sophie and Tommy's pediatrician, whom I'd met several times when I'd taken the children to appointments. Her voice was professional but concerned. "Mrs. Allen, I received a call from Rebecca expressing concerns about a family situation that might affect the children's living arrangements. I wanted to reach out directly to see if there's anything I can do to help mediate this situation." The fact that Rebecca had involved the children's doctor was breathtaking in its manipulation. She was creating a narrative where I was endangering the children's welfare, mobilizing professional concerns to add weight to her pressure campaign. I made a note to call Dr. Martinez back and set the record straight. But first, I had another call to make. I dialed the number for Patricia, my financial advisor, and explained what was happening. She listened without interruption as I described the escalating pressure campaign and Rebecca's attempts to involve outside parties. "Gloria, this is exactly the kind of situation I was worried about when we discussed ending the mortgage assistance," Patricia said. "Financial enmeshment with family members often creates these kinds of desperate reactions when the money stops flowing." She recommended that I document everything, just as the elder care attorney had suggested. "Keep records of every call, every text message, every attempt to pressure you. If this escalates further, You may need evidence that you're being harassed over a legitimate financial decision. Patricia also suggested that I consider changing my phone number if the harassment continues. You have every right to make your own financial decisions without being bombarded with guilt and manipulation. Don't let them wear you down with this campaign. That evening I called Dr. Martinez back. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but cautious. "Miss Allen, thank you for calling me back. I hope you don't mind me reaching out." Rebecca seemed very distressed about the family situation. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to create more drama but needing to set the record straight. "Dr. Martinez, I appreciate your concern for the children. However, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the situation. I ended a financial arrangement with my son and daughter-in-law, but the children are not in any danger of homelessness or neglect." Rebecca mentioned something about losing their house, Dr. Martinez said hesitantly. She was very emotional when she called. I sighed, recognizing Rebecca's talent for dramatic presentation. "The family will need to adjust their budget to live within their actual income rather than their income plus my financial contribution," I explained. "That may mean some lifestyle changes, but it's not a child welfare crisis." Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. "I see." Rebecca made it sound much more dire than that. "She mentioned something about you cutting them off completely over a holiday disagreement." I felt my jaw tighten at Rebecca's continued misrepresentation of the situation. "Dr. Martinez, I was excluded from the family's Christmas celebration because I wasn't considered immediate family," I said plainly. "I decided that if I'm not immediate family for holiday purposes, I shouldn't be providing immediate family level financial support either." "That's quite different from what Rebecca described," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "She suggested this was about hurt feelings over seating arrangements or something similar." I almost laughed at how the story continued to be minimized and distorted. "I'm afraid Rebecca hasn't been entirely accurate in her description of events," "But I appreciate your concern for the children's welfare. If you have specific worries about their safety or care, I'd encourage you to follow your professional protocols. However, this is a family financial matter, not a child protection issue." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, thinking about Rebecca's escalating desperation. She was pulling out every stop, involving everyone she could think of to create pressure from multiple directions. The fact that she was willing to involve the children's doctor showed how far she was prepared to go to restore the financial arrangement. I made myself a cup of tea and reviewed the day's text messages more carefully. Many of them contained similar language, suggesting that Rebecca had provided talking points or even drafted messages for her supporters to send. The coordination was impressive in its thoroughness and disturbing in its manipulation. One message particularly caught my attention. It was from someone named Brad, who identified himself as Michael's college roommate. "Mike's like a brother to me, and I hate to see him going through this financial crisis. I know family relationships can be complicated, but I hope you'll consider the impact on his career and his children's future before making any final decision." The fact that Rebecca had reached out to Michael's old friends suggested that Michael himself might not be fully on board with this pressure campaign. If he had been enthusiastic about mobilizing his support network, he would have made those calls himself rather than leaving it to Rebecca. Friday morning brought a new development. My doorbell rang at 8 o'clock, and I looked through the peephole to see a man in a suit holding a clipboard. When I opened the door, he identified himself as a process server and handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, representing Michael and Rebecca in what they called a family financial dispute. The letter claimed that my termination of the mortgage assistance constituted financial elder abuse in reverse, and threatened legal action if I didn't restore the payments. The legal theory was creative but completely without merit. Financial elder abuse typically involved younger family members exploiting older relatives, not older relatives choosing to stop subsidizing younger ones. The letter was clearly intended to intimidate rather than to pursue legitimate legal action. I called the elder care attorney I'd consulted earlier and read her the letter over the phone. She laughed at the financial elder abuse in reverse concept. "That's not a real legal theory," she said. "They're trying to scare you into compliance. I'd recommend having a response drafted that makes it clear you won't be intimidated by frivolous legal threats." She agreed to draft a response for a reasonable fee, and I authorized her to proceed.
Make it clear that I have every right to end the financial assistance, and that any further harassment or legal threats will be met with appropriate action, I told her. That afternoon, Rebecca showed up at my door again, this time with both children in tow. Sophie, my 7-year-old granddaughter, ran up to me with her usual enthusiasm, wrapping her arms around my waist in a tight hug. Tommy, who was 4, hung back shyly but smiled when I waved at him. "Grandma Gloria, Mommy says you might not come for Christmas," Sophie said, her voice confused and worried. "But you always come for Christmas. Who's going to help me open my big presents?" The manipulation was so transparent it made me sick to my stomach. Rebecca stood behind the children, her expression a mixture of triumph and desperation. She knew I would have difficulty having a difficult conversation in front of my grandchildren, and she was using their presence as a shield against honest discussion. "Sophie, honey, Christmas is still several weeks away," I said gently, kneeling down to her level. "Sometimes adults have to work out complicated things, but that doesn't mean anyone loves you any less." I looked up at Rebecca, who was watching the interaction with calculating eyes. "Rebecca, we need to talk privately," I said, standing up. "Children, why don't you go look at the Christmas decorations in my living room while your mother and I have a grown-up conversation?" Sophie took Tommy's hand and led him inside, both of them fascinated by the ceramic village I'd set up on the coffee table. Once they were out of earshot, I turned to Rebecca with barely controlled anger. "Using the children as emotional weapons is despicable, even for you." Rebecca's innocent expression didn't fool me for a second. "I'm not using them as weapons," she protested. "They asked to come see you. They're confused about why Grandma Gloria isn't coming for Christmas." I studied her face, looking for any sign of shame or self-awareness, and found none. "They're confused because you excluded me from Christmas, and then told them I was choosing not to come," I said. "You created this situation, Rebecca. You don't get to use their confusion to manipulate me into fixing it." "I brought them because I thought seeing them might remind you of what's really important here," Rebecca said, dropping the pretense slightly. "These children love you, and they're going to be devastated if they lose their home because of this fight." "They're not going to lose their home," I said firmly. "They're going to learn to live within their family's means. That's what children should learn from their parents." Rebecca's desperation was becoming more apparent by the minute. "Gloria, please, just consider giving us some time to adjust. Maybe you could continue the payments for 6 months while we figure out how to manage without them." The request for a transition period was more reasonable than her previous demands, but I recognized it for what it was: another attempt to delay the inevitable. "Rebecca, you've had 3 years to figure out how to manage without my payments," I said. 3 years to increase your income, to reduce your expenses, to become financially independent. Instead, you've become more dependent while treating me worse. That's not fair," Rebecca protested. "We've had new expenses. The children have gotten older. Costs have gone up," I nodded, "all of which are normal challenges that families face when they're living independently. You're not special or different from every other family that has to balance income and expenses." From inside the house, I could hear Sophie talking to Tommy about the Christmas village, pointing out the tiny ice skaters and the miniature church. Their innocent joy was a stark contrast to the ugly conversation happening on my front porch. "What am I supposed to tell them?" Rebecca asked, gesturing toward the house. "How do I explain that Grandma Gloria doesn't want to help us anymore?" The question was designed to make me feel guilty, but it also revealed Rebecca's fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. "You tell them the truth," I said. "You tell them that Grandma Gloria helped Mommy and Daddy for a long time, but now it's time for Mommy and Daddy to take care of things themselves. You tell them that families sometimes have to make changes and adjustments, but that doesn't mean anyone loves them less. And if we have to sell the house, if we have to move to a smaller place or change their schools." Rebecca's questions were becoming more emotional, her careful composure cracking under the pressure. "Then you explain that sometimes families have to make difficult decisions, but that home is wherever the family is together," I said. "You help them understand that material things are less important than family relationships." "Easy for you to say," Rebecca snapped. You're not the one who has to disappoint them. I felt my patience finally snap completely. Rebecca, I've been disappointing myself for 3 years to avoid disappointing you, I said sharply. I've been sacrificing my own financial security to maintain your comfort. I've been accepting exclusion and disrespect to keep peace in this family. I'm done disappointing myself to enable your sense of entitlement. Rebecca's mask slipped completely, revealing the anger and panic underneath. You're a selfish old woman who's willing to destroy her own family over petty grievances. The insult hung in the air between us, confirming everything I'd suspected about her true feelings. There it is, I said quietly. There's what you really think of me, selfish old woman. Not a generous mother-in-law who's subsidized your lifestyle for years, not a devoted grandmother who's put your family's needs ahead of her own, just a selfish old woman who's finally tired of being treated badly. Rebecca realized what she'd said and tried to backtrack. I didn't mean that. I'm just frustrated and scared. But the damage was done. She'd revealed her true opinion of me, and it matched what I'd suspected all along. Yes, you did mean it, I said. And I'm glad you said it, because now I can stop wondering what you really think of. You think I'm a selfish old woman whose only value is the money I provide. Well, this selfish old woman is keeping her money from now on. I called the children back outside, giving them each a hug and telling them I loved them. Sophie looked confused by the tension she could sense between her mother and me, but I managed to keep my voice calm and reassuring. I'll see you both soon, I told them, though I wasn't sure when or how that would happen. Remember that Grandma Gloria loves you very much, no matter what happens with grown-up stuff. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by my Christmas decorations and thought about the conversation. Rebecca's mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the contempt and entitlement that had been driving her behavior all along. She saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected. That evening, I received a draft response from my attorney. It was professional but firm, making it clear that I had every right to end the financial assistance, and that any further legal threats would be considered harassment. I approved the letter and authorized her to send it to Rebecca and Michael's attorney. The weekend brought a temporary lull in the pressure campaign. My phone was blissfully quiet, and I began to hope that the legal response had gotten through to them. I spent Saturday shopping for Christmas gifts for my few close friends, and Sunday volunteering at the local animal shelter. But Monday morning brought a new escalation. I arrived home from my weekly grocery shopping to find a news van parked outside my house. A young woman with perfectly styled hair approached me as I got out of my car, a cameraman following close behind. Miss Allen, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story about family financial disputes during the holidays. Would you care to comment on your decision to cut off your son's mortgage payments right before Christmas? I stared at her in shock, my grocery bags feeling suddenly heavy in my hands. I'm sorry, what? The reporter smiled with practiced sympathy. We understand you've withdrawn financial support from your son's family over a disagreement about Christmas plans. Our viewers would love to hear your side of the story. The fact that Rebecca had contacted local news media was so outrageous I almost couldn't process it. She was willing to air our family's dirty laundry on television to pressure me into restoring the mortgage payment. I have no comment, I said, pushing past the reporter toward my front door. Mrs. Allen, surely you understand how this looks to the community, she called after me, a wealthy widow cutting off her struggling son's family right before the holiday. I turned back, feeling my anger override my discretion. I understand exactly how it looks when you only hear one side of the story, I said, but I'm not going to discuss private family matters on television. So you deny that you've withdrawn financial support, the reporter pressed. You deny that your grandchildren might lose their home because of a Christmas disagreement. I took a deep breath, recognizing the trap she was setting. I deny that this situation is accurately represented by the person who contacted you, I said carefully, and I deny that my financial decisions are appropriate subjects for public discussion. I went inside and immediately called my attorney, who was as outraged as I was about the media involvement. This is defamation waiting to happen, she said. They're clearly implying that you're some kind of heartless villain without presenting any context or your perspective. She suggested that I contact the news station's management to complain about their coverage and to demand equal time if they aired the story. Don't let them control the narrative, she advised. If they're going to make this public, make sure your voice is heard too. But I wasn't interested in having a public battle with my own family. I called the news station and spoke to the assignment editor, explaining that the story was based on deliberately misleading information and asking them not to air it. He was polite but non-committal, saying they would review the footage before making any decision. That afternoon, I received a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived across the street. "Gloria, dear, there are people parked outside your house taking pictures," she said with concern. "Should I call the police?" I looked out my front window and saw a car with two people inside, one of whom was pointing a camera with a long lens at my house. The media attention was apparently continuing beyond the initial news crew. I called the police non-emergency line and reported the situation. The officer who arrived was sympathetic but explained that as long as they stayed on public property, there wasn't much that could be done. He did speak to the photographers and convinced them to leave, but he warned me that they might return. That evening, my phone started ringing again. This time it wasn't friends of Rebecca pressuring me to change my mind. It was reporters from other news outlets who had apparently picked up the story, local television, radio stations, even a freelance journalist from a regional newspaper. I stopped answering my phone entirely and let everything go to voicemail. The messages were all variations on the same theme: requests for interviews about the Holiday family financial dispute that was apparently becoming a local news story. Tuesday morning brought the news segment I'd been dreading. Mrs. Patterson called to tell me it had aired on the early morning show, and I found it online later that day. The story was every bit as biased and sensationalized as I'd expected. The segment opened with footage of Rebecca crying while holding Tommy, explaining how her elderly mother-in-law had suddenly withdrawn all financial support right before Christmas. The reporter's voiceover described me as a wealthy widow who was punishing her family over holiday seating arrangements. Michael appeared briefly, looking uncomfortable but supporting Rebecca's narrative. "My mother has always been generous with us," he said. "We're just confused about why she's chosen this time of year to make such a drastic decision." There was no mention of the years of financial support I'd provided, no context about the systematic exclusion I'd experienced, no explanation of the real issues behind the Christmas conflict. I was portrayed as a vindictive old woman who was holding her family hostage over trivial holiday disagreements. The story included an interview with a family financial counselor who spoke generally about the dangers of cutting off family support without warning. While she didn't know the specifics of our situation, her comments seemed to validate Rebecca's portrayal of me as unreasonable and cruel. The segment ended with footage of my house and the reporter's conclusion: "The Allen family hopes that Christmas spirit will prevail and that grandmother Gloria will reconsider her decision before it's too late." I sat in my living room after watching the segment, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. My reputation in the community was being destroyed by people who had systematically taken advantage of my generosity. I was being painted as the villain in a story where I was actually the victim. My phone started ringing immediately after the segment aired, but this time the calls were different. Some were from friends and acquaintances who had seen the news and wanted to offer support. Others were from strangers who had gotten my number somehow and wanted to express their opinions about the situation. One caller, a woman named Dorothy, left a particularly thoughtful message. "Gloria, I don't know you personally, but I saw the news story and something about it didn't ring true. I've been in similar situations with my own family, and I wanted you to know that some of us understand that there's always more to the story than what makes it onto television." Another caller, a man named Robert, was less supportive. "Lady, I don't know what your problem is, but cutting off your family at Christmas makes you look like a real piece of work. I hope you're proud of yourself." The avalanche of public opinion was overwhelming, and I realized that Rebecca had succeeded in creating a narrative that would be difficult to counter. Most people would only hear her version of events,
and my refusal to engage publicly would be interpreted as guilt or stubbornness. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called the news station back and asked to speak to Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had covered the story. When she came on the line, I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Mrs. Allen, I'm so glad you called. Are you ready to tell your side of the story?" I took a deep breath, knowing that once I opened this door, there would be no going back. "Mrs. Walsh, I've decided that I'm tired of being misrepresented in the media. If you're interested in the actual facts of this situation rather than just the drama, I'm willing to have a conversation." We arranged to meet the next day at my house, and I spent the evening organizing my documentation, bank records showing the mortgage payments, copies of the agreement I'd signed with Michael and Rebecca, records of the legal threats I'd received, screenshots of the harassing text messages. I also called Patricia, my financial advisor, and asked if she would be willing to speak to the reporter about the financial aspects of the situation. She agreed, saying that she was tired of seeing me portrayed as unreasonable when I was actually being financially responsible. For the first time since this whole situation had started, I felt like I was taking control of the narrative, rather than simply reacting to other people's actions. Was going to tell my story, the whole story, and let the community decide for themselves who was really being unreasonable. Wednesday morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, and spent time arranging my living room to look professional but welcoming. When Jennifer Walsh arrived with her camera crew, I was ready to set the record straight once and for all. Jennifer Walsh arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, accompanied by a cameraman and a sound technician. She looked surprised when I invited them all in for coffee before we began, clearly expecting a more hostile reception based on our previous encounter. I had spent the morning preparing not just my talking points, but also my evidence, organizing everything into neat folders that told the complete story of my relationship with Michael and Rebecca. "Miss Allen, I have to say I'm curious about what changed your mind about speaking publicly," Jennifer said as she set up her recorder on my coffee table. "Yesterday you seemed very reluctant to discuss this situation." I poured coffee for everyone, and took my seat in the chair I'd chosen specifically because it had good lighting and a neutral background. I realized that staying silent was allowing other people to control the narrative about my life, I said. "If this is going to be a public conversation, then the public deserves to hear all the facts, not just the parts that make good television drama." Jennifer nodded, glancing at her note. "Before we start recording, can you give me an overview of what you think people don't understand about this situation?" I opened the first folder and pulled out the mortgage assistance agreement I'd signed 3 years earlier. "People don't understand that this wasn't a sudden decision made in anger," I began. "This was a carefully considered choice to end a financial arrangement that had become unhealthy for everyone involved. And they don't understand the context of years of being systematically excluded from family life, while being expected to fund it." Jennifer leaned forward, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged by the promise of a more complex story. "Can you be more specific about that exclusion?" I pulled out a small notebook where I'd been documenting incidents over the past few years. "Last Christmas, I was told the family gathering was adults only, and that I could see the children the next day," I said. "The year before that, I was uninvited from Easter dinner because Rebecca's mother was visiting, and they didn't want too many people. 3 months ago, I found out about Tommy's birthday party on social media because no one thought to invite me direct." I could see Jennifer taking notes, her expression becoming more thoughtful. "These incidents individually might seem small, but together they create a pattern. I've been consistently treated as secondary to Rebecca's family, as someone whose presence is tolerated rather than treasured." "And yet you continued to help them financially?" Jennifer asked. I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of recognizing my own enabling behavior. "I kept hoping things would improve. I kept thinking that if I was patient and generous, and understanding, eventually I would be included as a real family member rather than just a financial resource." I opened the second folder, revealing bank statements with highlighted mortgage payments. "Over 3 years I've paid $64,800 toward their mortgage," I said, pointing to the records, "plus the original $35,000 down payment I gave them when they bought the house. Nearly $100,000 of my retirement savings." Jennifer's eyes widened at the figures, That's a substantial amount of money, I nodded. It's money I gave freely because I thought I was investing in family relationships, in being part of something bigger than myself. But what I was actually doing was paying for the privilege of being treated as an outsider. Tell me about the Christmas situation that triggered your decision, Jennifer said, her tone now more investigative than sensational. I described the conversation with Rebecca and Michael, their announcement that I wasn't immediate family, their casual dismissal of my feelings. The phrase that really crystallized everything for me was when Rebecca said I wasn't immediate family. I explained. After 3 years of mortgage payments, after decades of being Michael's mother, after 5 years of trying to build a relationship with Rebecca, I suddenly wasn't immediate family when it came to Christmas. How did that make you feel, Jennifer? I considered the question carefully, wanting to be honest without sounding self-pitying. Disposable, I said finally. Like my value to this family was entirely financial, and once they'd extracted what they needed from me emotionally, I could be discarded from the parts of family life that actually mattered to them. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, clearly processing this different version of the story. So your decision to end the mortgage assistance was directly connected to being excluded from Christmas. I shook my head. My decision was connected to finally understanding my role in this family dynamic, I clarified. Christmas was just the moment when everything became clear. I realized I was being used, that my generosity was being taken for granted, that I was enabling a situation that was unhealthy for everyone. Can you explain what you mean by unhealthy, Jennifer asked. I opened the third folder, which contained information about financial codependency that I'd researched after making my decision. When adult children become dependent on their parents' financial support while simultaneously excluding those parents from family life, it creates a toxic dynamic, I explained. The adult children never learn to be truly independent, and the parents become trapped in relationships that are transactional rather than loving. By continuing to subsidize Michael and Rebecca's lifestyle while accepting their exclusion and disrespect, I was enabling them to avoid the consequences of their choices. I was preventing them from growing up and taking responsibility for their own lives. Jennifer nodded slowly. And you believe ending the financial support will force them to become more independent? I smiled slightly at the question. I know it will. They'll have to create a realistic budget, make difficult choices about their spending, possibly consider Rebecca returning to work. These are all normal challenges that families face when they're living independently, but I've been shielding them from those realities. What about the claims that they might lose their house? Jennifer asked. I pulled out a financial analysis that Patricia had helped me prepare. Their mortgage payment is $1,800 a month, I said. Michael's salary is enough to cover that payment, plus their basic living expenses. What they can't afford is their current lifestyle, which includes expensive vacations, designer clothes, private lessons for the children, and eating out several times a week. So they're not actually facing homelessness? Jennifer asked, and I could hear the shift in her understanding of the situation. Absolutely not. They're facing the need to live within their means, which is what every other family in America has to do. The difference is that they've become accustomed to living within their means, plus my $1,800 monthly contribution. Jennifer was taking detailed notes now, clearly realizing that the story she'd originally reported was incomplete. Why didn't you mention any of this when I first approached you? I considered the question. Because I was hoping to handle this privately, within the family, I said. I never intended for this to become a public situation. Rebecca was the one who contacted the media, who involved reporters and television stations in what should have been a private family matter. She also organized a campaign of harassment, I continued, opening the fourth folder to reveal printed screenshots of text messages and voicemail. Friends of hers have been calling and texting me constantly, trying to guilt me into changing my mind. She involved the children's pediatrician, claiming I was endangering their welfare. She even had their attorneys send me threatening letters. Jennifer studied the documentation, her expression growing more serious. This is quite different from the story Rebecca told us. I nodded. Rebecca is very good at presenting herself as a victim, I said. She's had 5 years of practice making me feel guilty for having needs and expectations of my own, but the evidence tells a different story. Can you walk me through the financial arrangement you had with them? Jennifer asked. I pulled out the original agreement and explained how it had started as temporary assistance that had gradually become permanent dependency. The original plan was for me to help for 6 months while Rebecca transitioned back to work after having Tommy, I explained. But 6 months became a year, then 2 years, then 3 years. Every time I brought up ending the arrangement, there was a new crisis or excuse. Meanwhile, their lifestyle kept expanding. They renovated their kitchen, took expensive family vacations, bought new cars. They were living like a family with a much higher income than they actually had, because they were using my income to supplement theirs. Jennifer was clearly engaged with this more complex narrative. Did you ever set conditions on your financial assistance? I pulled out copies of conversations I'd documented over the years. I asked repeatedly to be included in family decisions about major purchases. If I'm contributing $1,800 a month to the household budget, I thought I should have some input into how that money is being used, but they viewed my contribution as unconditional while treating my presence as conditional. What do you mean by that? Jennifer asked. I found the notes I'd made about various family events and exclusions. My money was always welcome, but I wasn't, I explained. They expected me to contribute financially without expecting anything in return emotionally. When I tried to be more involved in family decisions or when I expressed hurt about being excluded from events, I was told I was being too demanding or manipulative. It sounds like a very one-sided relationship, Jennifer observed. I nodded, feeling validated by her understanding. It was completely one-sided. I was giving financially, emotionally, and practically, helping with childcare, attending every school event, being available whenever they needed me. But when I needed something from them, like inclusion in Christmas or respect for my feelings, suddenly I was asking too much. Jennifer paused to review her notes. What would you say to people who think you're being vindictive, or using money to control your family? The question struck at the heart of the public perception I was trying to change. I'd say that choosing not to fund someone's lifestyle isn't the same as controlling them, I replied. Michael and Rebecca are free to make whatever choices they want about their lives, their relationships, their holiday celebrations, but I'm also free to make choices about how I spend my money, and who I support financially. If I were trying to control them, I would have threatened to cut off their mortgage payments, unless they included me in Christmas, I continued. Instead, I simply accepted their decision about my family status and adjusted my financial support accordingly. They can't have it both ways. They can't exclude me as family while expecting me to fund them as family. What has the community response been like since the first news story aired? Jennifer asked. I thought about the phone calls and messages I'd received. Mixed, I said honestly. Some people have reached out to offer support and to say they understand that there's more to the story. Others have been critical, assuming that any grandmother who would abandon her family must be unreasonable or cruel. The criticism has been painful, I admit. Being portrayed as a vindictive old woman in the media isn't pleasant, but I've realized that people who rush to judgment without knowing all the facts probably aren't people whose opinions I should value anyway. Jennifer was nodding thoughtfully. Have Michael and Rebecca attempted to reconcile with you since this became public?
I pulled out the most recent communications I'd received. Michael called yesterday asking if we could work something out before this goes any further, I said. But his focus was entirely on restoring the mortgage payments, not on addressing the underlying issues that created this situation. Rebecca sent a text message this morning saying she's willing to forgive me if I reconsider my decision, I continued, showing Jennifer the message. The fact that she thinks I need her forgiveness for ending a financial arrangement that was never mandatory shows how little she understands about what's actually happened here. What would it take for you to consider reconciling with them? Jennifer asked. I had thought about this question extensively over the past few weeks. For them to acknowledge that they've been taking me for granted and treating me poorly, I said. For them to commit to including me in family life as a valued member rather than a tolerated obligation. For them to demonstrate that they want me in their lives for reasons other than my financial contributions. But most importantly, for them to become financially independent and stop expecting me to subsidize their lifestyle, I continue. Our relationship needs to be based on mutual respect and affection, not on financial dependency. And the mortgage assistance specifically? Jennifer pressed. I was firm in my response. That's over permanently. Even if we reconcile completely, even if our relationship becomes everything I've hoped for, I will never again put myself in the position of being someone's financial safety net while being excluded from their emotional life. Jennifer spent several more minutes asking detailed questions about the timeline of events, the specific incidents of exclusion, and the financial impact of my decision. She also asked to interview Patricia, my financial advisor, who confirmed the details of the financial arrangement and spoke about the unhealthy dynamics that often develop in these situations. Mrs. Allen has been incredibly generous with her family, Patricia told Jennifer. But generosity becomes enabling when it prevents people from learning to be responsible for themselves. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop rescuing them from the consequences of their choices. After the interview crew left, I felt simultaneously exhausted and relieved. I had finally told my complete story, providing context and documentation that had been missing from the public narrative. Whether this would change public opinion remained to be seen, but at least I had tried to set the record straight. That evening, I received a call from my sister Margaret in Arizona. She had seen the original news story online and was calling to check on me. Gloria, I watched that first news segment and I was furious. That woman made you sound like a monster when anyone who knows you understands how generous you've been with that family. I did another interview today, I told her, explaining my decision to speak publicly. I realized that staying silent was letting them control the narrative about my life. Margaret was supportive of my choice. It's about time you stood up for yourself publicly, she said. You've been protecting their reputation while they've been destroying yours. I'm proud of you for finally fighting back. We talked for over an hour about family dynamics, financial boundaries, and the importance of self-respect. Margaret reminded me of similar situations with other family members over the years, times when I had prioritized keeping peace over protecting myself. You've always been the family peacekeeper, she said. But sometimes keeping peace means allowing other people to treat you badly. You're finally learning that your peace of mind matters too. The next morning brought a surprising development. I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, asking if I would be willing to participate in a follow-up story that would air that evening. We've received a lot of feedback about yesterday's interview, she said. People are asking questions about the financial aspects of the situation and wanting to understand more about family financial boundaries. She had also apparently tried to reach Michael and Rebecca for comment on my version of events, but they had declined to be interviewed again. They referred all questions to their attorney, Jennifer said. But I think your interview yesterday raised important questions about their original claim. I agreed to a brief follow-up interview, feeling encouraged that the story was evolving beyond simple drama into a more nuanced discussion of family relationships and financial responsibility. The second interview focused more on the broader implications of my situation. Jennifer asked about financial boundaries with adult children, about the difference between helping and enabling, and about the challenges facing older adults who want to be generous with their families without being taken advantage of. I think many people in my situation struggle with these same issues, I told her. Adult children who expect ongoing financial support while offering little in return emotionally, parents who want to help but end up feeling used and excluded. What advice would you give to other people facing similar situations? Jennifer asked. I considered the question carefully. Set clear boundaries from the beginning, I said. Don't let temporary assistance become permanent dependence, and don't accept being treated poorly just because you're providing financial support. Family relationships should be based on mutual love and respect, not on financial transactions. Most importantly, remember that saying no to unreasonable demands isn't selfish, I continued. Taking care of your own emotional and financial well-being isn't cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their irresponsible behavior. The follow-up story aired that evening and was significantly different in tone from the original. It included more context about the financial arrangement, more details about the pattern of exclusion I had experienced, and expert commentary about family financial dynamics. A A family therapist interviewed for the story spoke about the importance of boundaries in relationships. When financial support becomes expected rather than appreciated, it can create unhealthy dependence. The person providing support often feels taken for granted, while the person receiving support may feel entitled rather than grateful. The story also included comments from a financial planner about the risks of subsidizing adult children's lifestyles. Parents who continue to bail out their adult children financially are often preventing those children from learning essential life skills like budgeting, prioritizing expenses, and living within their means. Public response to the second story was markedly different from the reaction to the first. My voicemail filled up with messages of support from people who had found themselves in similar situations with their own families. One message was particularly touching. It was from a woman named Carol, whose daughter had been financially dependent on her for years while treating her with disrespect and ingratitude. Your story gave me the courage to have a difficult conversation with my daughter about our relationship. Carol, I realized I was enabling her irresponsibility because I was afraid of conflict. Another caller, a man named Frank, shared his experience of supporting his son's family for years, only to be excluded from important family events. I always felt guilty about feeling used, he said, but hearing your story helped me understand that my feelings were valid and that I deserved better treatment. Not all the responses were positive. Some callers still believed I was being unreasonably harsh, that family should support family unconditionally. But even the critical responses seemed more thoughtful than the initial knee-jerk reactions to Rebecca's version of events. One voicemail stood out among the rest. It was from Dr. Martinez, Sophie and Tommy's pediatrician, who had been contacted by Rebecca the week before. Miss Allen, I want to apologize for getting involved in what I now understand is a more complex situation than I was told, she said. After seeing your interview, I realize I may have been given misleading information about the children's circumstances. The validation from Dr. Martinez felt particularly meaningful because it confirmed that Rebecca had been deliberately misrepresenting the situation to create pressure from multiple sources. Friday brought another unexpected development. I received a formal letter from Michael and Rebecca's attorney withdrawing their previous legal threats and acknowledging that I had every right to end the financial assistance. The letter was brief and professional, but it represented a significant retreat from their previous aggressive position. I suspected that their attorney had advised them that pursuing legal action would only draw more attention to their financial dependency and the circumstances that led to my decision. The public scrutiny had apparently made them realize that continued legal threats would likely backfire. That afternoon, I received a call from Michael. His voice was subdued, almost defeated. "Mom, I watched your interview last night," he said. "I wanted to apologize for how this whole situation has been handled." I was surprised by the call and cautious about his motivation. "What specifically are you apologizing for, Michael?" I asked. There was a long pause before he answered. "For taking you for granted, for not standing up to Rebecca when she wanted to exclude you from Christmas, for expecting you to keep helping us financially while not treating you like family." His words sounded genuine, but I had heard similar apologies before that hadn't led to lasting change. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. "But apologies don't mean much without changed behavior. What are you planning to do differently going forward?" Another pause. "Rebecca and I are going to marriage counseling," he said. "We've realized that we have some serious communication problems and that we've been handling family relationships poorly. We want to do better." "That sounds like a positive step," I said, genuinely pleased that they were seeking professional help. "What about the financial situation?" Michael's voice became more strained. "We're meeting with a financial planner next week to figure out how to manage without your help," he said. "It's going to be difficult, but we understand that we need to become independent. And Rebecca is looking into returning to work part-time," he continued. "She's not happy about it, but she realizes that our current lifestyle isn't sustainable on my salary alone." I felt a mixture of sadness and hope at his words. Sadness that it had taken such a public crisis to force these realizations, but hoped that perhaps something positive could come from this difficult situation. Michael, I want you to know that ending the mortgage assistance wasn't about punishing you, I said. It was about forcing all of us to have honest conversations about our relationships and our expectations. I understand that now. I just wish we could have had these conversations before everything got so complicated. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. The good news is that we're having them now, I said. It's not too late to build healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. We talked for several more minutes about their plans for becoming financially independent and their hopes for repairing our family relationships. Michael seemed genuinely committed to making changes, though I remained cautious about trusting too quickly. What about Christmas? He asked near the end of our conversation. Is there any possibility that we could find a way to celebrate together this year? I considered the question carefully. Michael, if you invite me to Christmas now, how will I know whether it's because you want me there or because you're hoping to repair our relationship enough that I might reconsider the mortgage assistance? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I hadn't thought about it that way, he admitted. I guess any invitation now would feel manipulative, wouldn't it? I appreciated his honesty. It would feel suspect. I agree. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it needs to happen gradually and authentically, not as a response to a crisis or as a way to achieve some other goal. So what do you suggest? He asked. I had been thinking about this possibility since our conversation had begun. I suggest you focus on the changes you need to make for yourselves, I said. Work on your marriage, figure out your finances, learn to be independent. If you can do that successfully, then maybe we can talk about rebuilding our relationship next year. But this Christmas, I think it's better if we maintain some distance while you work on these issues, I continued. It will give you time to make changes without the pressure of trying to manage our relationship at the same time. Michael was quiet for a moment. That makes sense, even though it's disappointing, he said finally. I was hoping we could fix everything quickly, but I guess some things take time. The best things usually do. I agree. But if you're serious about making changes, if you're committed to becoming independent and treating me with respect, then I'm open to working on our relationship when you're ready. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about the conversation. Michael had sounded different, more mature and self-aware than I'd heard him in years. Whether this represented genuine growth or temporary remorse remained to be seen, but I was cautiously optimistic that something positive might emerge from this crisis. That evening, I called Patricia to update her on the latest developments. She was pleased to hear about Michael's apparent willingness to become financially independent, but she shared my caution about trusting too quickly. People often make dramatic promises during crises, she reminded me. The real test will be whether they follow through when the immediate pressure is off. Give them time to prove their commitment before you let your guard down completely. Her advice resonated with me. I had been hurt too many times by promises that weren't kept, by temporary changes that reverted to old patterns as soon as the crisis passed. If Michael and Rebecca were serious about changing, they would have to prove it through consistent actions over time, not just words during a difficult period. 6 months later, I found myself sitting across from Michael and Rebecca in a cozy coffee shop downtown, watching them present a detailed budget spreadsheet with the enthusiasm of students showing off a school project. The transformation was remarkable. Rebecca's designer handbags had been replaced with practical alternatives, and Michael looked genuinely proud as he explained how they'd managed to reduce their monthly expenses by nearly $2,000. We canceled the country club membership, Rebecca said, her voice steady without the manipulative undertones I'd grown accustomed to. Tommy's tennis lessons now happen at the community center, and Sophie takes piano from Mrs. Chen down the street instead of that expensive academy across town. She paused, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. We also sold the BMW and bought a used Honda. The payment dropped from $600 to $250 a month. I studied their faces, looking for signs of resentment,
or the passive-aggressive martyrdom Rebecca had perfected over the years. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine pride in their accomplishment. Michael was particularly animated, as he described learning to cook meals at home instead of ordering takeout 3 nights a week. "The kids actually love helping with dinner prep," he said, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in months. "Sophie's become quite the sous chef, and Tommy thinks cracking eggs is the most important job in the world." For a moment I glimpsed the man I'd raised, the boy who used to help me bake cookies and proudly present his culinary disasters as gourmet meals. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed me photos of their renovated basement, which they'd converted into a home office space. "I started freelance marketing consulting in February," she explained. "It's part-time so I can still be available for the kids, but I'm already bringing in about $1,500 a month. By next year, I hope to be making enough that we can actually start building some savings." The change in her demeanor was striking. Gone was the entitled princess who'd expected others to fund her lifestyle, while offering nothing in return. This version of Rebecca seemed grounded, practical, almost humble. When she mentioned their plans to take a camping vacation instead of their usual expensive resort trips, she actually sounded excited about s'mores and hiking trails. "The marriage counseling has been incredible," Michael added, reaching over to squeeze Rebecca's hand. "We learned that we were both operating from fear and insecurity, making decisions based on what we thought we deserved rather than what we could actually afford or sustain." He looked directly at me as he continued, "And we learned that we'd been treating you terribly because it was easier than facing our own shortcomings." Dr. Karen Williams, their marriage counselor, had apparently helped them understand the toxic dynamics they'd created, not just with me, but with money and responsibility in general. Rebecca described sessions where they'd role-played difficult conversations, learning to communicate honestly about their fears and expectations instead of manipulating each other through guilt and pressure. "I realized I'd been viewing your financial help as validation that I was a good mother and wife," Rebecca admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. "When you gave us money, it felt like approval. When you asked questions about how we were spending it, I felt criticized and defensive." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "I turned you into the enemy because it was easier than admitting I was scared about our finances and my own capabilities." Their transformation extended beyond just budgeting and communication. They'd started attending community events together, volunteering at Sophie's school fundraisers, and building relationships with neighbors they'd previously ignored. Michael had joined a men's support group through their church, learning to process his emotions without expecting others to fix his problems. "One of the biggest things I learned is that being a man doesn't mean having all the answers or never needing help," he said. "But it also doesn't mean expecting other people to rescue me from my own poor decisions. I spent years treating you like a safety net instead of my mother." Rebecca nodded, adding her own revelation. "And I spent years seeing you as competition for Michael's attention instead of recognizing that healthy families can love multiple people without it being a zero-sum game." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I was threatened by how much the kids loved you, how much Michael respected your opinion. Instead of trying to build my own relationships, I tried to minimize yours." The conversation was surreal in its honesty and maturity. These were the same people who 6 months earlier had organized media campaigns and legal threats to force me back into funding their lifestyle. Now they were taking responsibility, making changes, and speaking like adults who understood consequences and accountability. I found myself believing them, but also maintaining the healthy skepticism that 6 months of transformation couldn't completely erase years of learned caution. "How are the children adjusting to all these changes?" I asked, genuinely curious about my grandchildren's adaptation to their family's new reality. "Surprisingly well," Michael replied. "Sophie was disappointed about giving up some of her activities at first, but she's made new friends at the community center and loves having more family time. Tommy barely noticed the changes because he's 4 and mostly cares about whether someone will read him bedtime stories." Rebecca pulled out her phone again, showing me videos of the kids helping with household chores and garden projects. "We've tried to frame everything as the family working together toward goals rather than as sacrifices or punishments. They're learning about money management and the value of hard work in age-appropriate ways." The evidence of their genuine transformation was compelling, but I knew the real test would be their response to my boundaries. I want you both to know that I'm proud of the changes you've made, I said carefully. You've clearly put in tremendous effort to build a healthier family dynamic, but I also want to be clear that the financial assistance arrangement we had before is permanently over. I watched their faces closely for signs of disappointment, manipulation, or attempts to negotiate. Instead, Michael nodded firmly. We understand completely, and we wouldn't want it any other way, he said. We've learned that depending on your financial support was preventing us from growing up and taking responsibility for our own lives. Rebecca's response was equally mature. Honestly, Gloria, I'm embarrassed that we ever put you in that position, she said. Looking back, I can see how unfair and manipulative our behavior was. We were taking advantage of your generosity while treating you terribly, and then we had the nerve to act like victims when you finally stood up for yourself. Their accountability felt genuine, but I needed to address the deeper issue that had caused our— What about family inclusion going forward? I asked. How do I know that you want me in your lives for reasons other than financial security? Michael and Rebecca exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. We've talked about this extensively in counseling, Rebecca said. We realize that we need to rebuild trust through consistent actions over time, not just words during a crisis. We'd like to start small, Michael added. Maybe family dinners once a week, including you in the kids' activities when you're interested and available, asking for your advice on things that don't involve money. He smiled slightly. Basically, treating you like the beloved family member you've always been, instead of like a bank we occasionally had to appease. Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. And we want to contribute to your life too, not just expect you to contribute to ours. I'd love to help you with technology projects or home organization. Michael's been wanting to fix that loose step on your front porch for months, but was afraid to offer because everything felt so complicated. Their offer to contribute to my life rather than just expecting contributions from me felt like a fundamental shift in perspective. For years our relationship had been entirely one-directional, with me giving time, money, energy and support while they took whatever I offered without reciprocating. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant. I've missed being part of your daily lives, and I've missed feeling like my presence was wanted rather than just tolerated. I paused, considering how to address my remaining concerns. But I think we should agree on some ground rules to prevent falling back into old patterns. We spent the next hour establishing boundaries that protected everyone's autonomy while fostering genuine connection. Family gatherings would be planned together with input from all parties. Financial discussions would be separate from relationship discussion. Everyone would have the right to say no to requests without guilt or manipulation. Most importantly, we agreed that rebuilding our relationship would be measured in months and years, not weeks. Trust that had been damaged over years couldn't be repaired overnight, no matter how sincere everyone's intentions were. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped packet. This isn't much, but I wanted you to have something that represents our new beginning, she said, handing it to me with slightly trembling hands. Inside was a simple silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Family is love in action." The gift was modest but thoughtful, clearly chosen with care rather than purchased out of obligation or manipulation. It represented exactly the kind of gesture I'd been hoping for: meaningful rather than expensive, personal rather than generic. I love it, I said, and meant it completely. For the first time in years I felt like I was receiving a gift from someone who actually knew and cared about me, rather than someone trying to buy their way back into my good graces. 3 months later, our new family dynamic had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sunday dinners rotated between their house and mine, with everyone contributing to meal planning and preparation. I helped Sophie with her science fair project about plant growth, and Michael had indeed fixed my front steps along with several other minor home repairs. Rebecca and I had developed an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect rather than obligatory politeness. She often called to ask for advice about parenting challenges, or to share funny stories about the kid. I found myself genuinely enjoying her company for the first time since she'd married my son. The children had adapted beautifully to their family's new financial reality, and seemed happier with the increased attention and stability their parents provided. Sophie had become quite proud of her family's budgeting skills, often announcing to her friends that they were saving money for important things, when explaining why they couldn't afford certain activities. Christmas that year was different from any we'd shared before. Instead of an expensive, elaborate celebration funded by my contributions, we had a modest, joyful gathering focused on time together rather than expensive gifts. I was included in every aspect of the planning, from menu selection to decoration hang. The gifts under the tree were thoughtful rather than lavish, many of them homemade or carefully chosen within reasonable budget. Sophie had knitted me a slightly crooked scarf in my favorite color, and Tommy had created a picture book about Grandma Gloria and her awesome garden, with his father's help. As I watched my family navigate their new reality with grace and genuine happiness, I realized that my decision to end the financial assistance had given all of us something more valuable than money: authentic relationships based on love and respect rather than dependency and obligation. The mortgage payments I'd made for 3 years had cost me nearly $70,000 and almost destroyed our family relationships. The decision to stop making those payments had cost me nothing financially and had given us the chance to build something real and lasting. I still had the newspaper clipping from the follow-up story that had run 6 months after my original interview. The headline read, "Local family finds independence and healing after financial crisis." The article featured Michael and Rebecca describing their journey toward self-sufficiency and their gratitude for the difficult lesson that had forced them to grow up and take responsibility for their lives. Most importantly, it featured Sophie's quote about how families should take care of each other with love, not just money. At 7 years old, she had already learned the lesson it had taken the adults in her family decades to understand. As I tucked my grandchildren into bed that Christmas night, listening to their excited chatter about the day's activities and their plans for tomorrow, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I was finally part of a family that valued my presence as much as my presence, that included me because they loved me rather than because they needed something from me. The journey from financial codependency to healthy independence had been painful for all of us, but it had ultimately given us something invaluable: the chance to love each other freely, without the complications of money and obligation overshadowing genuine affection and respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.